Hello, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's nice to see both of you, Anne Marie and Greg here. This is Anne Marie. Yes, it's nice to see you as well.
Likewise.
This is Christy. Thank you for those of you that are joining us today. We do have captions in a separate link that we're going to put into the chat for you. You should see the link there in the chat momentarily. I would like to go ahead and get started with introductions, and then we'll get started because we have a fun day planned. My name is Christy McBee, and this is my name sign, and I am President of Operations for CSD ASL Now. I am a woman with reddish brown curly hair, with a black blouse, and I'm now going to turn it over to Anne Marie. Thank you, Christy. This is Anne Marie Killian, and I am a white woman with brown shoulder-length hair. I have a black shirt. I'm wearing glasses. And in my background, I have a French country dining room and a blue couch and a gray floor. I will let you know, though, I have two dogs that are teacup poodles, and they're very excited, and they are very excited to be a part of this presentation. So I do apologize in advance if their excitement shows and they come on screen, but thank you so much, and I'm glad to be here. This is Christy. Thank you, Anne Marie. Yes, that'll be fun to see your little dogs in the background. I always enjoy seeing them. Next, Greg, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hello. Yes, my name is Greg Bland. This is my sign name. My pronouns are he, they. I am the Director of Business Development here at CSD SVF. I also run an NPO, a nonprofit organization called ASL Inc., which is to provide strategic and executive training for our volunteers. I provide the tech training for that, which goes along very nicely with our topic today. And it's wonderful to see everyone here today. And I'm looking forward to talking about this.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate that introduction.
Mhm.
And happy to have you all here today. Happy to chat with you all and learn more about your thoughts about how the digital world out here today and how it's accessible, or in some ways, how maybe it's not up to par with accessibility. And so that's some of the things that we're going to address today. So let's start off with our first question for you guys today. So accessibility, and equality on a technical platform. What's the difference between that? So this is Anne Marie speaking. Ah, it's a fabulous question. So my role with CEO at TDI for Access, that comes up to me often thinking about that. You know, accessibility and equality, are they truly the same thing or are they different? And different how? They are interconnected with one another. However, there is definitely a difference between what the roles are with accessibility and equality. Accessibility is more about the design, the function, the features, you know, how all of that allows for communication to be accessible and how to connect to that. So, for example, captioning, the interpreters, those types of things are products of accessibility. Now, equality is more about opportunities, like at employment, having the same opportunities, getting a home loan just as anybody else would, looking for an equal opportunity to those of people that might not have been marginalized otherwise, but they actually have the same equal opportunities as the majority community. And having accessibility helps to achieve equality. If there is no accessibility, then you can't have equality. You know, as with hiring, or, you know, how do you hire someone with a disability? How does that work? You have the accessibility, you can now hire them equitably. So again, explaining a little bit more about that, and the accessibility is interlinked with equality. This is Anne Marie. I mean, this is Christy. You can't have one without the other, right? Anne Marie's response, of course. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Thank you so much. I really love, Anne Marie, what you'd said. It made me think of something I wanted to add. Within, different platforms and solutions, typically developers have optimized mindset, which means that they're not focused on equality or on accessibility. They're very often focused on data. When you get to a page, is there one screen? How many mouse clicks? That sort of information and analysis is the best way to figure out sales or something of that nature. And so design does not often include things like equality or accessibility. Oftentimes it's, already baked into the system. I would like to define both of those, what accessibility means. Accessibility in design means that a person who may have a disability or other challenges can still access and use a specific platform in its entirety and fully. Equality means design for all, including people without disabilities, people without challenges, and people with both simultaneously. I think that's all I have.
This is Christy. Yeah, that's really great. I'm glad you brought that up, talking about web design and web being available to all people. And, can everybody read and understand what they're seeing in that digital space?
It's
And
true.
that's really what we want to talk more about. This is Anne Marie. In the professional industry, we call it IAP. That's where you set up this certification. You might be familiar with it. It has a more, what I can't remember what the certification name is for those consultants, but basically they are developing and addressing different accessibility issues, websites, social media, all of those different digital avenues. And it's really inspiring to see that happening. But we still have a long way to go. There's still a lot of things that need to be done. Obviously, we are moving forward. I was not born in the technology age. Okay, I'm showing my age here. But anyways, we were not that generation of technology. So, but now this is. And so a lot of people that are the younger generation haven't experienced what it's like without the technology. But yes, that accessibility and that equality, they're not quite equal to one another yet. And we still have involvement to go, and we still have a ways to go for that. This is Christy. I agree. Before I jump to our next question, for those of you who just joined, I do want to let you know that the Zoom captions are not functioning as intended. Therefore, please look in the chat. You'll see a link there that says Type Well link. Please click on that link in order to see the captions in a separate screen. All right, moving on to our next question. Again, talking about websites. For videos that you see online in a digital space, should those videos incorporate maybe a picture-in-picture signer as well as captions? Especially for people that might have limited literacy or reading skills, how does that work for someone to access that content? Greg?
Yeah, I think this question really makes me think because, so long ago when I was younger and, what would you want? If you wanted ice cream, you'd go and say, Mom, hey, can I get ice cream? And your mom would say no. So what would you do? You'd ask dad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same thing, the same approach here. If people in the deaf community and in other communities as well have different levels of access to different languages and different language preferences, ASL, English captions, they're not the same and it's not the same thinking process even. It's not the same structure. One message in English could have various meanings in ASL. Oftentimes, if you don't consider both languages, you will have errors in decoding the message. There will be errors that occur. Messages may be misunderstood. People maybe not understand instructions or recommendations. Full coverage for more marketing reach, I would recommend both. Yes.
Yeah, this is Christy. I like that analysis with, if mom says no, ask dad.
It's just a memory.
Anne Marie? This is Anne Marie. Yes, this topic has been debated and discussed with policy. I've worked with the FCC. I've worked within the industries and all of the different providers for all of the different captioning companies. And Just this morning, I had such an integral meeting with a provider talking about this topic for the industry, talking about an emergency alert system. And that really is a hot topic right now with multiple different languages for that. So your question, should it be in sign? Should it be in caption? Is it too distracting to people to have all of those additional mediums? But it's important for people to have choices. I can turn off the captions if I choose. I can watch the interpreting or the signer. At the end of the day, we have a commitment to make sure in an emergency situation, it has to be accessible to everyone. When there is a disaster or a crisis, everyone needs to be able to get that information. And majority of the people like having the luxury of both, at least those that are deaf and hard of hearing. If the signer is gone, then they can watch the captioner. If the captions aren't there, they can watch the signer. If one's not clear, they have another option. It's important to have all of that incorporated. And of course, that's still a discussion that's happening today. And you don't realize the big picture of who makes those final decisions impacts the majority. I mean, it doesn't, the big picture decision maker is part of the majority community. They're not recognizing the minority community. But you know what? 80% of hearing people depend on captioning. 80%.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yes. So think about it. It actually makes sense. You might have children that are screaming in the living room and mom and dad are trying to watch a football game or something, or maybe you're out in a restaurant or a parent are teaching their children to read and teaching their children's language. So really the impact is not just the deaf and hard of hearing community, but it's really being utilized for education. And people don't realize that. So that's really our goal, is to teach people what they don't know.
That's a great point. This is Greg, a great point.
This is Christy. You're talking about that 80% utilizing caption. So my dad is one of those 80%. He has captions on all the time and he's hearing, but he still likes to watch it with the captions on. This is Anne Marie. Well, believe it or not, the goals and that facts, that study has shown that as we become more savvy and more experienced, that really means we're getting older. But anyways, the more experienced we are, the more our hearing starts to deteriorate. And there will be a time that everybody is going to realize, believe it or not, that by 2035, that the majority of us are going to be older, all of the boomers, all of the rest of those generations. There's a huge opportunity for us to impact most of the community. 99.9% of Americans have some sort of disability, whether
Yeah.
it's mental, physical, emotional, but we need to recognize that and that impact, and this will impact everyone. So this is Christy. Are there legal obligations, legal guidelines, like web accessibility guidelines utilizing WCAG, WCAG? And what should these companies be following regarding WCAG requirements and legal requirements for deaf and hard of hearing? Anne Marie says, Greg, you take it.
Yeah, this is Greg. I've got some information as far as the legal, obligations and compliance is concerned. WCAG, like you mentioned, we've also got other laws, for instance, the ADA, which is most well known, 503 for formulation, I think. Yeah, oh, yes,
Yes, 508.
that's right, that's right. But they've got theirs. I think Ontario has people, I can't remember the exact name, and I don't want to make an assumption here, but don't forget that, when resources are being developed and apps, it's an international market. Websites, if you show up at the history and see who's showing up, it's not just in the United States, it's not just America, it's globally. So it helps to be conscious of different laws and guidelines across the globe as well. And that is something that we can offer here. For example, WCAG is not mandated, it's not mandatory. In the past, we used websites without a problem and all of a sudden noticed that when you would email them, my recommendation would be email the developer. Got more, yeah, I've got a little bit more influence there, sales to customer service. I've emailed them and said, hey, I'm not able to use your platform. I can't recommend it to people. And usually I'll get a response they're grateful for the information. So be compliant with WCAG is my recommendation.
Yes, with the WCAG. This is Christy. The WCAG or WCAG is the one entity, but are there other rules, guidelines that people should in general just follow, or is everybody utilizing WCAG? This is Anne Marie. So regarding WCAG, there is a current bill happening that is in discussion right now regarding web accessibility for visually impaired, low vision people. And really, we're lobbying with Senate and Congress in order to get this passed. WCAG is challenging as far as who is reinforcing that and who is doing all of that. And so who is complying, who is making sure that it is WCAG compliant. Enforcement isn't critical, but it's not there. It's missing. There isn't any enforcement in order to ensure that people are complying with that. So that's just one example. So WCAG is very important for people who are involved in the marketing entity, and to really have a true understanding, in-depth understanding of what these services are and how to make sure that everything is accessible for their platforms. And it's very much a hot topic. There is a bill, like I had mentioned, that is being introduced now. Well, actually, let me step back. There was a bill called the CVAA in 2010, which was passed successfully regarding this. But 2010 was a long time ago. That was 14 years ago. And technology has evolved over these 14 years. And today, many of the things that are there are not in place. So this bill is antiquated. So we have aggressively been working with consumer organizations that we've been partnering with to push for a reintroduction of the CVAA, and it will be called the CVTA. And the T is really important because that's technology accessibility. CV is the same. So if you want access to live streaming, and if it's only available at a certain time, like this television show doesn't have caption, then they're not supposed to stream it, because one influences the other, to make sure that all things are 100% captioned and available and can be displayed. We've seen many situations that have happened with the Super Bowl. For those of you that might, there were interpreters there for the Super Bowl, but people had to watch it on a separate screen. So it was the point about having the ASL available on a same site as everything else, not having to utilize a separate device or social media in order to see the language. And so that was very powerful. We see these types of things every day, presidential briefings, about COVID briefings, State of the Unions. Having the American Sign Language that is there is available and not just the captions. So it's amazing for what they have fought for, and the White House is doing phenomenal with making this happen. It's about time. But we don't want to see that dissipate. We want to make that to become the standard, that there is a signer as well as captioning for all things. So the CVTA committee, it can't work in isolation. We aren't a silo. We are asking everyone to come onto our website, sign on, reach out to your Congress people and ask them to to be a part of and support the CVTA. It talks about captioning, it talks about ASL, it talks about audio description. It keeps us up to date with the current technology that we are utilizing at this point in our lives. This is Christy. Just had to wait for the captioner to catch up. It says, that's okay. My interpreter's champ. I had a lot to say and she needed to catch up on her words. This is Christy. So you mentioned talking about having signers and ASL incorporated during the White House briefings. Now, that kind of goes back to the earlier point that each of you made about wanting to have captioning as well as American Sign Language on all types of videos because there are people that don't have English as their first language or as a language that's accessible. So now let's look at our next question. What are some of the best practices, innovative solutions that have addressed accessibility challenges for our deaf users?
It's up
Mm.
to you. Do you want I'm
Okay, this is Anne Marie. I'll go. You know, people are very knowledgeable. They understand about captioning. They understand about VRS, VRI potentially. I think it's important, though, at least one thing that's very important is for the community to have an understanding about DVC, which is direct video connection. You know, VRS has three people involved. It has the person who's calling, it has an interpreter, and then it has the deaf or hard of hearing person. So it's a three-way call. And VRS is amazing. Don't let me say otherwise. We have to keep VRS where we need our interpreters to be clear. Before I state what I'm going to say, VRS is important, interpreters are important. However, there is a time where there is a need to have point-to-point communication available for the deaf and hard of hearing community in their native language of American Sign Language, when they're contacting different providers, their bank, the IRS, SSI, SSDI, Social Security, those types of things, they want to utilize their natural language, their native language. You know, as you already know, and you can see, ASL is a beautiful language. It's a conceptual language. It's a visual language. And some interpreters might not be the right fit for it. Some interpreters are. But, for a deaf person to be able to have that communication through their own language, it's phenomenal. So, I struggled with Comcast and my internet with them. I am not a very tech savvy person. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually be an expert when it comes to technology. And so I was struggling with Comcast. And so when I finally called, all of a sudden I was like, I made this one call and I was like, oh, wait, you're a deaf person that's answering the call? And I was like, wait, I don't understand. So then I explained my situation. This was another deaf person that I was talking to working with Comcast, not an interpreter who has no idea about my internet issues. And to be fair, that's not their area of expertise, but actually talking with a Comcast representative who could utilize American Sign Language and could get me to tier 2 level support in my language without having to go through miscommunication, that was amazing. That is DVC at work, and that made things more equitable. Also, as you know today, artificial intelligence, my goodness, AI, artificial intelligence is nothing new. It's been around since the 1950s. There were concerns of people of utilizing AI and people thinking that it hasn't been around and it's brand new, but it's not. There are company innovations that are leveraging, or should I say not leveraging, taking advantage of AI in lieu of utilizing an interpreter. And we have a group from the Attorney General's office that is doing a lot of research about when AI should be used and when it shouldn't be. And there was a concern in the community because of that. So AI has gone through a lot of different data sets. And what I mean by data sets is developing from one set of data where the AI, which you see today, is basically a comparison of billions and billions and billions of bits of data from people's phone, from your home, getting into your Ring cameras, all of those types of things. All of that data is there, but it's not being utilized yet. So not necessarily a concern about AI, but there's a lot that could still be happening. There's RFPs out there about utilizing AI in lieu of interpreters or AI in lieu of live captionists, meaning there isn't a live captioner like we have, but that's a concern also. And again, ASR, automated speech recognition, is not 100% accurate. It depends on the situation and it depends what you're needing and whether or not a captioner should be present. So the FCC is looking for all IPTC contacts to have both ASR as well as human captioners available for that redundancy purposes. Sorry, I'm going on and on. I am very passionate about this issue, and I think that it's important that people should know it.
I'm just, yeah, two things that you mentioned that you brought up that I think are really important and critical. DVC, the direct video calling, like you mentioned, those services today, it's from point to point conversation where a deaf person who maybe doesn't understand their equipment, their whatever it is that they need to use, and doesn't understand, whatever the case may be, whatever the hardware is, whatever it says, to be able to pull up to speak with a deaf person and express their needs
Yeah,
through
in their language, comfortably, in
yes,
their language.
and understand as a deaf person to a deaf person the concerns and have that empathy and have that connection is powerful. It's powerful. And now with
Honestly, it's beyond powerful. I still get goosebumps from my experience that I had that time, and this happened last year, and I didn't know it was gonna happen, and I'm still dwelling on it because it was so rare to see, and you're right. Industry could provide these services if they recognize that they are now serving their community, and we deserve to have that equitable access, for getting a loan, for contacting Social Security Administration, for knowing what the doctors are saying, talking about with the pharmacist, how many milligrams are we supposed to be taking? How often do you take? It's so important to have that clear communication.
this is Christy, and I agree. The other thing is AI, right? You lose that the humanity, that understanding. I see Greg. Did you have something you wanted to add? I see you're thinking. I can see the wheels turning. This is Greg. Yeah, I had a few notes here that I didn't want to lose on my train of thought. Before I jump into the AI discussion, I want to back up just a little bit quickly to an earlier topic, that last question about Anne Marie had mentioned about 2010 being outdated. I want to make sure that I emphasize that we are simply updating the technology, right? The policy and rules and regulations, because the technology has changed so quickly. 5 years ago, computers are different than they are today, right? The experience is different. The policies and the laws and the regulations are not necessarily up to the technology. The other thing, as far as AI is concerned, I love that topic. Artificial intelligence is just like Anna Marie said, it's old. It's been here for a long time. But the reason that it's different is because, in the early, I think 2010s, it really started to take off because of better tools, more in-depth learning, that sort of thing. Prior to that time, it was so complicated. I remember writing code that I thought was for AI, and it was, oh my gosh, it was tedious. And now, a 16-year-old kid can download Python and do it themselves without a problem. So the opportunities are there. And just like Anne Marie just said as well about data sets, we consider it's so important that AI and other, you know, I don't know, it's just so easy to forget about marginalized groups because there's a lot of risk to consider here when it comes to AI.
Absolutely.
This is Christy. The risk of using AI is the potential consequences are risky. So I know we've only got about 15 minutes left. I wish we could keep going. It's just so fabulous. This is a great
Yes, me
conversation
too.
we're having. But talking about advocacy groups and advocating here and trying to raise awareness and trying to spread and change the technology industry to be more inclusive and promote inclusivity within the industry. How can we do that? How can we approach that?
This is Anne Marie. You know, you can't advocate for policy alone. It has to be done in a collaboration of different consumer organizations, CSD, my organization, TDI, NAD, APD, the American Association of People with Disabilities, HLAA, the American Foundation of the Blind. There are so many groups that together we can fight policy. But as I mentioned earlier, magic doesn't happen. It requires the integration of people whom are familiar of what's going on, shaping and influencing that policy. reaching out to the community, hearing what the community has to say, and really taking it to heart. People are like, yeah, 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 I heard him, I heard him. No, take it to heart. That's really what's important. Agreeing with recommendations and figuring out how to navigate through policies and understanding what the variable needs are within groups of disabilities. ICT, information communication technology. It's a very powerful collaboration. Really proud of the work that they have done and collaborated with. And so really just having that discussion on the table and listening and actually hearing and taking to heart everything that people with disabilities are saying that they need and advocating for.
This is Christy. The power of collaboration is real. It is. Greg, did you have anything you wanted to add? This is Greg. Yeah, I think another addition to this conversation might be, I can give a little bit of context here. Usually, right, you remember those anti-smoking ads that they would show pictures of people with what the lungs looked like, and it wasn't very enjoyable to watch those PSAs. Research shows that if anti-smoking with a negative message versus anti-smoking with a positive message, that the negative message, that you'll get sick, that all of these negative things might happen to you, that if you say that you can run faster, or you can, win a sports game, or you can dance better, with a more positive connotation to those anti-smoking ads, they found that usually there was a better impact with a positive message. And so for that, oftentimes in the tech field, or anything in this industry, trying to shift more towards that positive connotation and saying, I kind of want to put here a reward as well. If we proactively award, or if we award inclusivity proactively, people who are motivated and interested and want to go ahead and develop things that are more inclusive technology, and they get an award for that. I don't know if that, is through policy, through grants, through tax deduction, what have you, but it could cause that shift, because the mind shift and the mindset would become more standard that way if there's incentive there. And you can partner with procurement, procuring it from government. That way they can be more conscious and set best practices. And companies then will be required to comply, right? If through third parties or what have you. But it's, I think, a really powerful start and approach to this type of industry change. This is Christy. Yeah, that's a wonderful point you said about proactive inclusivity, I think is what you said. Yes, yes, that's wonderful. Before the next question, I wanted to make sure that people who are watching are aware that they can add their questions. We'll have about 5 minutes towards the end that we will allow for a Q&A from the group here in the community who's watching. What roles do you think that governments can play in incentivizing or mandating accessible standards for things like, you know, virtual platforms, what have you? What would you say about that? Oh, I want to check my notes. This is Greg.
This is Anne Marie. There's a lot of meeting out, so legislation, a lot of meeting out with the Congress people, but that also goes back to, Greg, what you said and that beautiful analogy of the negative anti-smoking campaigns or the positive anti-smoking campaigns. The strategy that we're working together for those policies, focusing more on the positive. And instead of saying, if change doesn't happen, this bad thing will happen. So legislation is really critical. Also talking about involving the community, taking the time to listen, be a part of that change. Sign the petitions. You see lots of petitions going out. You see lots of campaigns coming out. Participation in those types of things takes less than 2 minutes. If an email is sent to you, click and forward. But the power in numbers really helps, because again, policy can't be done alone. Also, looking back, as I had mentioned earlier, from the meeting that I had today, we need to be invited to the table for discussion to occur.
Absolutely.
A lot of decisions, development, and planning don't necessarily involve us. They don't involve the deaf community or people that have that lived experience in those particular spaces. So allyship is important, but they need to invite the right people to the table. That has a huge impact and pressure for change, that policy, and really putting the pressure onto them for us to be at the table. But pressure with being that proactive desire to collaborate with the influencers in government. We're not trying to tear them down. That doesn't work. But, at the end of the day, we want to do right by everybody. There are so many bills, so many things, so many complaints, so many issues. How do we look at all of these things and make sure that all of the important parts are being identified?
This is Christy. Yes, have a place at the table. That's so important. That's so important. Absolutely. Greg? This is Greg. I really just want to say thank you to what you just said, Anne Marie, because our participation is vital. It's vital. And like you said, so many people don't include us in the discussion, or they'll try to, who's on the team for grants, for instance. You get a grant and who's deaf? Who's there is deaf. So another thing I wanted to bring up is that governments can require reporting and requirements for platforms in government related services, for example, businesses, because right now everyone is looking at what works and what doesn't work and trying to analyze new best practices or new ideas or new strategies or new ways forward. That quote is, what gets measured gets managed. So if you think increased data and access and data quality will probably open so many doors for all of us. This is Christy. Yes, data is so important. It's vital. Really quickly, I just wanted to add one way that we're collecting data. I mean, do you have an idea of one way? This is Greg. If there is a requirement for that, for instance, any sort of just aggregation of data somewhere, some organization can collect the data set themselves and be a body that's responsible for that data collection or aggregation. I'm not sure if I answered your question though. Yes, this is Christy. Again, it's just such a challenge to really collect data as a whole. And it's a challenge. I know it's contacting deaf people and trying to see and hear from them. So Anne Marie had said, listen from the heart, truly. And how can we improve the way that we are actually collecting that data from the deaf community? Oh, this is Greg. I get what you're saying. Okay, so what I'm thinking is try to focus instead of surveys or qualitative research, focus more about if you use an app, for instance, they already collect data there, right? The data, they have everything about how you use it, when you use it. You've really got to look at the type of data that's being collected. It's mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. And so from my frame or my mindset, I think if you could send it automatically through a computer to some sort of repository or API, meaning that they receive automatically all of that data, that's the type of thing that I would envision here.
This is Anne Marie. Just to add to that, data collection has been an ongoing issue for many years. At CSUN, they collect a lot of data there, and it's a push for them to include all of those particular types of data on people with disabilities. With my experience and change, getting good quality data is expensive. And there's so much intricacies of the data and the collection and potential selling of data from all of the different disability groups. So really, organizations who are investing in providing the inclusion and putting money into a fund that can then be utilized with one organization indicating that it's their responsibility to, figure it out, create the data collection. It's not a fine science. It's really a mishmash of how all of this data is collected and utilized. We want data, but are people willing to support the money in order to collect all of that? Data is rich and people will spend millions of dollars to buy that data. So it's again the perspective of who's collecting it, what they're doing with it, how do we access it? There's just not a science for that. We have to continue to push for the collaboration of the data collection and usage.
Mrs. Christie, that is where we are advocating and where our groups are trying to push more for something like that. We have two great questions from the audience I see here. First, we'll start with Catherine. I can see here Catherine H. with the Department of Homeland Security. Her question is, I'm curious what percent of website content is inaccessible to deaf and hard of hearing individuals? Uh, Apparently, I am involved here. She says, I am involved with Section 508 compliance accessibility for immigration. And that is a question I'm asked often. So that is the question about what percentage of website content is not accessible. Any thoughts? This is Greg. I want to give you an answer, but honestly, I don't know. I know that it's more than enough.
Yeah, this is Anne Marie. First of all, thank you so much for that question. Glad to hear that your department is looking at this and joining this webinar because of that. You know, with my experience and filing with all the different things we've been doing with different consumer organizations, I can tell you that very small part of it is accessible, and the statistics are not positive about the accessibility of it. And this is global for, you know, for the blind community. There's a huge bill happening right now for the blind community to make things accessible for them as well. And some of that applies to our community as well. It is a progress. It is a progress. It doesn't happen overnight. That is my motto every day. I know that I don't know that I'm gonna ever make it to the finish line by the time I leave this earth, but it
Yes.
is a progress and it happens. And I think looking at it right now, I don't have numbers and data to give you, but my personal experiences and my work and my advocacy that I've done is it's quite hefty.
This is Krusty. Thank you both for that question and answer. We do have time. Let me see here. If we do, we're going to go ahead and briefly see if we can answer this last question. I see um, the security teams at various organizations. Do you think that they can help to ensure digital solutions are secure and accessible?
Well, this is Anne Marie. When you're talking about security, I'm assuming that you're talking about industry that does IT security and responsible for like cybersecurity. Is that what the question is referring to? Because there are different types of security, so I'm not quite sure what the question is relating to.
Mrs. Christie, that's a good question. I'm not seeing anything come up or any sort of response. But let's assume that for this conversation and the purposes of this conversation, that security teams involve ensuring that what they have available through their company is still aligns with secure practices in addition to accessible practices.
This is Anne Marie. Security is huge globally. I love the concept. You know, it's there. Somebody's there to make sure that things are being secured. And I'd love to see at a security level there be compliance for the security. You know, I hear people say, oh, you know, security is tough. Security are tough people because of their accountability. Well, that's been my experience. I do think that it's an important role, but you also have to advocate for all of this security to be under compliance. And of course, that depends on what department it is, but that's a great idea.
This is Christy. Yeah, I think it does take education, right? And ongoing learning, absolutely, to ensure that they are accessible and secure. So I think that that's about it for us for today. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've loved
Yes.
chatting with both of you and the audience. Thank you so much. We will review the captions and share the recording at a later date. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.